What if I told you that a single moment of injustice could unravel an entire empire? Imagine being denied something so basic, not because of what you did, but because of who you are. This is the story of Alyssa Harper, a pregnant Black woman whose simple journey to see her family turned into a fight against a powerful airline, and how her courage brought an entire corporation to its knees. Stay tuned, because what happens next will leave you speechless. Alyssa Harper shuffled through the crowded terminal, one hand clutching her overnight bag and the other gently resting on her swollen belly. At 8 months pregnant, every step was a calculated effort, her body heavy yet resilient. The trip to her hometown was supposed to be a joyful reunion before the arrival of her first child, a moment to gather strength from her family before the whirlwind of motherhood began. She had booked her ticket weeks in advance, carefully choosing an aisle seat for comfort. Nothing about this trip was spontaneous. Everything was meticulously planned. But as she approached the airline's check-in counter, her optimism began to waver. The attendant, a slim woman with a pinched expression and a polished uniform, greeted Alyssa with an impatient sigh, barely glancing up from her computer. Behind her, the line of passengers grumbled, eager to move along. "Name?" the attendant asked curtly. "Alyssa Harper," she replied, her tone calm but tinged with exhaustion. The attendant's eyes flicked up, widening ever so slightly as she took in Alyssa's figure. The glance was quick, but Alyssa caught it, a look that shifted from indifference to judgment. "You're flying economy?" the attendant asked, her voice louder now, drawing unwanted attention from nearby passengers. "Yes," Alyssa confirmed, her brow furrowing at the unnecessary emphasis. The attendant tapped furiously at the keyboard, her lips pursing tighter with each click. "Ma'am, our policy requires that passengers over a certain weight purchase an additional seat for their safety and the comfort of others. Do you have a second seat booked?" The words hit Alyssa like a slap. She stood frozen for a moment, trying to comprehend what she had just heard. "I'm sorry, what?" Alyssa finally managed to say, her voice low but steady. "You'll need to purchase an additional ticket," the attendant said, as if explaining to a child, "or we won't be able to allow you to board." The murmurs from the line behind her grew louder, a mix of irritation and curiosity. Alyssa felt their stares boring into her back. She could almost hear their unspoken assumptions. Isn't she too pregnant to travel? Why didn't she prepare better? "First of all," Alyssa began, squaring her shoulders, "I'm pregnant. My doctor cleared me to fly. And second, my weight is well within the guidelines stated on your website. So no, I don't need an extra seat." The attendant's eyebrows arched, and a condescending smile curled her lips. "Ma'am, I'm simply following protocol. If you'd like, I can process a refund for your ticket instead." Alyssa's heart pounded in her chest. She could feel her blood pressure rising, a dangerous sensation for someone in her condition. She took a deep breath, willing herself to stay calm. "This is discriminatory," she said firmly. "You're treating me differently because I'm pregnant." "Ma'am, I'm sorry if you feel that way," the attendant replied, her tone anything but apologetic, "but the policy is clear. Next, please." Alyssa stood her ground, but the attendant had already moved on, gesturing to the passenger behind her to step forward. She was dismissed as though her presence didn't matter, as though she didn't matter. For a moment, Alyssa felt utterly defeated. The humiliation burned hotter than her anger, and tears threatened to spill over. She turned away from the counter, clutching her belly as if to shield her unborn child from the ugliness of the world. Near the terminal seating area, Alyssa found a quiet corner and sank into a chair. She tried to calm her racing mind, but the scene replayed in her head on an endless loop. She hadn't imagined the snickers from the staff at the counter or the whispered comments from other passengers. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a message from her mother. "Can't wait to see you, sweetheart. We're all counting down the hours." Alyssa stared at the screen, her vision blurring with unshed tears. How could she tell her family she wasn't coming, that her airline, one of the largest in the country, had deemed her unworthy of a seat? As she sat there, a shadow fell across her. She looked up to see an older man, neatly dressed in a blazer and holding a leather briefcase, standing before her. His expression was one of quiet concern. "I couldn't help but notice what happened back there," he said, his voice low and steady. "Are you all right?" Alyssa hesitated. She didn't know this man. Why would he care? "I'm fine," she said, brushing away a tear. "Just another day in the world, I guess." He chuckled softly, but his eyes remained serious. "I'm not sure that's something you should accept. My name's Langston. And if you're willing, I think we might be able to do something about this. Alyssa tilted her head, intrigued despite herself. What do you mean? Langston glanced around the terminal before lowering his voice. Let's just say I know a thing or two about how airlines work. And what happened to you? That's not protocol. It's prejudice. If you're willing to fight this, I'd like to help. For the first time that day, Alyssa felt a flicker of hope. Alyssa regarded Langston skeptically, her hand still protectively cradling her belly. The terminal buzzed with activity around them, announcements blaring from speakers, the rhythmic hum of rolling luggage, and the chatter of travelers. But in that moment, it all felt distant. This stranger, Langston, stood before her, offering help without explanation. Why would you want to help me? Alyssa asked, her tone guarded but curious. You don't even know me. Langston offered a faint smile and took the seat beside her, maintaining a respectful distance. You're right, I don't know you, but I know injustice when I see it, and I've seen too much of it to stand by and do nothing. Alyssa studied his face. His weathered features and graying hair suggested he was well into his 60s, but his sharp eyes carried a depth of wisdom and experience. There was no trace of condescension or pity in his expression, only quiet conviction. Okay, she said cautiously. Let's say I'm interested. What exactly can you do? Langston leaned forward, resting his briefcase on his lap. First, let's get the facts straight. That attendant claimed it was about your weight, but we both know that wasn't the real issue. This wasn't about safety or comfort. It was about discrimination. I've seen it happen before, and I know how to recognize it. Alyssa raised an eyebrow. You sound like you've been through this before. Not personally, Langston admitted, but I've worked in aviation for over 3 decades. Safety regulations, passenger policies, internal audits, you name it, I've handled it. I spent years consulting for airlines, making sure they stayed on the right side of the law. That's why I can tell you with certainty, what happened to you wasn't policy. It was prejudice. Alyssa's skepticism began to waver. If you're so experienced, why aren't you still working in the industry? Langston's smile faltered, a shadow passing over his face. Let's just say I've seen enough corruption to last a lifetime. Some battles are easier to fight from the outside. Alyssa nodded slowly, sensing there was more to his story but deciding not to press. Instead, she turned her focus back to her own predicament. So what do we do? Because right now, I feel like I'm fighting a giant with a toothpick. Langston's eyes glinted with determination. First, we gather evidence. Discrimination cases live or die on proof. Did you get any names? Witnesses. Alyssa thought back to the counter. The attendant's badge said S. Cooper. And there was another woman at the next counter who heard everything. I think her name was Jessica, but I doubt she'd speak up. Noted, Langston said, pulling a small notepad from his briefcase and jotting down the names. Now, did they give you anything in writing? A copy of the policy they claimed you violated? Alyssa shook her head. Nothing. Just verbal excuses and a lot of attitude. Langston nodded, his pen moving swiftly across the page. Typical. They rely on people not knowing their rights. But that's where we start turning the tide. As they strategized, Alyssa felt a shift within herself. The humiliation from earlier still lingered, but it was now laced with a growing resolve. For her unborn child, she couldn't let this incident pass without a fight. I can file a complaint, she offered. But let's be real. What's that going to do? They'll brush it off like they always do. Langston smiled knowingly. Complaints are the first step, but not the last. What they don't expect is for someone like you to push back. Trust me, they've buried plenty of complaints before, but we're going to make this one impossible to ignore. Their conversation was interrupted by an announcement overhead. Attention passengers on Flight 237 to Atlanta. Boarding will commence shortly at Gate 12. Alyssa looked at the gate, a pang of frustration hitting her chest. That was supposed to be her flight. Instead, she sat on the sidelines, excluded from a journey she had every right to take. Langston followed her gaze. Don't worry, he said. They think they've won, but this is just the beginning. As if on cue, a uniformed airline employee approached their seating area. It was S. Cooper, the attendant who had denied Alyssa boarding. She carried a clipboard and wore an air of forced politeness. Ma'am, she said stiffly, addressing Alyssa. We've reviewed your situation, and as a courtesy, we're willing to refund your ticket in full. You're welcome to rebook after the baby is born. Alyssa stood, her jaw tightening. Courtesy? You mean after humiliating me in front of a terminal full of people, you think a refund is going to make it right? Cooper blinked, caught off guard by Alyssa's assertiveness. I'm sorry if you felt mistreated, she replied mechanically, but we're following standard policy. Langston stepped forward, his voice calm but commanding. Is that so? Perhaps you'd like to show us the exact policy she violated? Cooper hesitated, her confidence wavering. I don't have it on hand, but then I suggest you find it, Langston interrupted, because as of now, you're being documented for discriminatory practices. And trust me, your airline's legal team will hear about this. Cooper's face flushed, and she retreated quickly, mumbling something about company guidelines. Alyssa turned to Langston, her eyes wide. That was incredible, she said. How did you? Langston smirked. Years of practice. And this is just the beginning. As the terminal continued to buzz around them, Alyssa felt something stir within her, a strength she hadn't known she possessed. Langston's unwavering support was a lifeline, but it was her own resolve that would carry her through the fight ahead. She wasn't just standing up for herself anymore. She was standing up for every person who had ever been told they didn't belong. This was her first step forward, and she wasn't going to back down. The departure board flickered, listing flights Alyssa would not be on today. Gate 12, her gate, announced the final boarding call for Atlanta. Passengers hurried past her in waves, a blur of families, solo travelers, and couples clutching their carry-ons. Each step they took echoed Alyssa's own sense of exclusion, a sharp reminder that the airline had deemed her unworthy of a place among them. Alyssa sat with her back straight, her hands gripping the edge of her seat. Langston's laptop hummed faintly beside her as he typed furiously, his concentration unwavering. She glanced at him, marveling at his quiet determination. He didn't have to help her, yet here he was, drafting what he called the first salvo, in a battle he promised they would win. I should have said more back there, Alyssa said softly, breaking the silence. Langston paused mid-keystroke and turned to her, his eyes kind but firm. You said enough. Don't let their arrogance make you doubt yourself. She sighed. I just hate how they made me feel, like I was less than, like I didn't belong. Langston closed the laptop and faced her fully. That's exactly why they do it. They want you to feel small, powerless. But let me tell you something, Alyssa. Power doesn't come from them. It comes from here. He tapped his chest, then gestured toward hers. And you've got plenty of it. His words settled over her like a warm blanket, softening the sharp edges of her self-doubt. Thank you, she said quietly. He smiled. Thank me when we've won. As they waited, Langston explained the deeper layers of the system they were up against. This airline isn't just a business, he said. It's a fortress. They've got policies, legal teams, PR spin doctors, all designed to protect them from accountability. They'll argue that what happened to you wasn't discrimination, but an interpretation of safety regulations. They'll twist it, make it sound like they were doing you a favor. Alyssa frowned. So what do? How do we fight something that big? We outsmart them, Langston replied. We don't just prove what they did was wrong. We show how it's part of a pattern. Airlines like this don't operate in a vacuum. If they did it to you, they've done it to others. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. This is a collection of complaints filed against this airline over the past 5 years. Denied boarding, excessive baggage fees, seat reassignments, all disproportionately affecting women, people of color, and anyone they think won't fight back. Alyssa took the folder, flipping through the pages. Her stomach churned as she read the stories, each one a painful echo of her own experience. How did you get all this? Langston smirked. Let's just say I have connections. And now, we're going to add your case to the pile. Alyssa closed the folder and met his gaze. So what's next? Next, Langston said, leaning forward. We put the pressure on. Langston suggested they approach Jessica, the employee who had witnessed the incident at the counter. Alyssa hesitated. She didn't trust the staff to go against their employer, but Langston's insistence won out. They found Jessica near Gate 16, scanning boarding passes for another flight. She looked up as they approached, her expression cautious. Can I help you? Langston stepped forward. Miss Jessica, we'd like to talk to you about what happened earlier. You were there when Miss Harper was denied boarding. Jessica's eyes darted around nervously. I don't know if I can help you. I just work here. Alyssa stepped in, her voice steady but pleading. Please. You saw what happened. You know it wasn't right. Jessica hesitated, her lips pressing into a thin line. Look, I know what they did was wrong, she admitted quietly. But if I speak out, I could lose my job. Langston's tone softened. I understand the risk, but staying silent only lets them keep doing this. If you're willing to help, we'll make sure you're protected. Jessica glanced around again, then leaned in. I'll think about it, she whispered. But you didn't hear this from me. Cooper? She's been reported before. You're not the first. The revelation sent a surge of anger through Alyssa. She clenched her fists but kept her voice even. Thank you. That means more than you know. Jessica nodded, her gaze flickering with guilt as they left. As Alyssa and Langston returned to their seats, an announcement crackled over the intercom. Attention passengers. Alyssa Harper, please report to the customer service desk immediately. Alyssa's pulse quickened. What now? Langston stood with her, his expression unreadable. Let's find out. At the customer service desk, they were met by a stern-looking manager with a name tag that read R. Turner. His posture was rigid, his gaze icy. Miss Harper, Turner began. It's come to our attention that you've been questioning our staff and disrupting operations. If this continues, we have no choice but to escort you out of the terminal. Alyssa's jaw dropped. Are you serious? I'm not disrupting anything. I'm standing up for myself. Turner's expression didn't waver. This is a private company, and we reserve the right to refuse service. I suggest you leave quietly. Langston stepped forward, his voice calm but sharp. Mr. Turner, threatening Miss Harper only adds to the case we're building against your airline. And trust me, by the time we're done, you'll wish you had simply apologized. Turner's confidence faltered for a split second before he regained his composure. Good luck with that, he said coldly, before walking away. Alyssa felt the weight of the confrontation settle over her, but Langston's steady presence kept her grounded. They're trying to scare us off, he said. That means we're getting under their skin. Alyssa nodded, determination hardening in her chest. I'm not backing down. Not now. Langston grinned. Good. Because neither am I. As they left the desk, the terminal seemed less daunting. Alyssa wasn't alone in this fight, and for the first time, she felt the strength of her resolve outweigh the sting of humiliation. The battle was just beginning, and she was ready. The night sky loomed outside the terminal windows, casting long shadows over the nearly deserted airport. Flights had come and gone. The earlier buzz of passengers now replaced by the soft hum of cleaning machines and the occasional crackle of announcements. Alyssa sat across from Langston in a quieter section of the terminal, a mix of exhaustion and determination in her eyes. Langston adjusted his blazer, looking as calm as ever, but Alyssa could see the gears turning in his mind. His laptop was open again, the screen filled with documents, spreadsheets, and legal references. Alyssa stared at it, wondering how they would take on a giant like the airline with just two people and a shared sense of outrage. They're going to keep pushing, Alyssa said, breaking the silence. People like them don't just back down. Langston looked up, his expression resolute. And neither do we. They've underestimated you, Alyssa. That's their first mistake. Alyssa leaned back, her hands on her belly. You make it sound so easy. It's not, Langston admitted. But you're tougher than you think. You've already faced their humiliation and stood your ground. That's more than most people manage. Alyssa let his words settle over her. She had spent so much time doubting herself, feeling like she had to apologize for existing in spaces where she wasn't welcomed. But now, with Langston's guidance, she was starting to see herself differently. Maybe this fight wasn't just about her. It was about everyone who had been treated as less than. Langston clicked through his files, his brow furrowed. We need to escalate this. The documents we've collected so far tell a damning story, but we need something stronger, something irrefutable. Alyssa frowned. Like what? Langston turned the laptop toward her, showing a list of names. Former employees of the airline, testimonies, internal leaks. If we can find someone who worked behind the scenes, someone willing to talk, we'll have the leverage we need. Alyssa scanned the names. Most were unfamiliar, but one stood out. This name, she said, pointing to a name halfway down the list. Tara Hayes. I think I've heard that name before. Langston's eyes lit up. She's a former customer service manager who left the airline 2 years ago. She filed a discrimination lawsuit against them, but it was settled out of court. Alyssa leaned forward. Do you think she'd be willing to help? Langston shrugged. Only one way to find out. It took Langston less than an hour to track down Tara Hayes' contact information. As he dialed her number, Alyssa sat beside him, her nerves tightening with every ring. The call connected, and a woman's voice came through, cautious and wary. Hello, Tara Hayes, Langston said, his voice calm but firm. My name is Langston, and I'm working with a woman named Alyssa Harper. We're investigating discriminatory practices at your former airline. There was a long pause before Tara responded. I'm sorry, but I can't talk about that. I've already been through enough. Langston pressed gently. I understand, Miss Hayes. But what happened to you is happening to others, people like Alyssa. We're not asking you to risk anything, just to point us in the right direction. Another pause, and then Tara sighed. What happened this time? Langston handed the phone to Alyssa, who recounted her story. The humiliation at the check-in counter, the dismissive attitude of the staff, and the systemic issues they were uncovering. Tara listened silently, her occasional hums the only sign she was still on the line. When Alyssa finished, Tara finally spoke. I can't say I'm surprised. They have a history of this kind of behavior. I left because I couldn't take it anymore. But if you're serious about this, I might be able to help. Relief flooded Alyssa's chest. Thank you. Anything you can do would mean the world to me. I'll send you some documents, Tara said. Emails, internal memos, things I kept when I left. It's not much, but it might help. Langston took the phone back. That's more than enough. Thank you, Miss Hayes. You've just given us a fighting chance. By the next morning, Tara's file arrived in Langston's inbox. Alyssa watched as he sifted through them, his expression growing more intense with every click. This, Langston said, holding up a printout, is the beginning of the end for them. Alyssa leaned in to read the document. It was an internal memo from the airline's management, instructing staff to closely monitor passengers who do not meet aesthetic standards, a euphemism for profiling passengers based on race, body type, and other arbitrary factors. The language was careful but unmistakable. They've been doing this intentionally, Alyssa said, her voice shaking with a mix of anger and vindication. Langston nodded. And now we have the proof. As Alyssa and Langston prepared to file a formal legal complaint, the airline struck back. Alyssa received a letter from their legal team, thinly veiled as a warning. It claimed that her disruptive behavior at the terminal had caused operational delays and hinted at potential legal action if she continued to pursue her claims. Alyssa read the letter, her hands trembling. They're trying to intimidate me. Langston took the letter from her and ripped it in half. That's all they've got. Intimidation. Don't let it scare you. It means we're getting closer to the truth. That evening, as Alyssa sat in her quiet apartment, she reflected on how far she had come in just a day. The humiliation she had felt at the terminal was still fresh, but it no longer defined her. With Langston's help, she was transforming her pain into power. She placed her hands on her belly, feeling the soft movements of her unborn child. We're going to make this world better for you, she whispered. No one's going to tell you that you don't belong. The next morning, Alyssa and Langston filed their formal complaint, armed with Tara's documents and a growing determination. The airline might have been a giant, but Alyssa was no longer afraid. She had found her voice, and she was ready to use it. The fight was far from over, but for the first time, she truly believed they could win. The courtroom was not yet in view, but the battle had begun in earnest. Filing the complaint triggered a ripple effect that neither Alyssa nor Langston could ignore. News of the case spread quietly among legal circles, while the airline scrambled to protect its image. Alyssa, however, found herself navigating a new reality, balancing her growing resolve with the constant weight of being in the public eye. It started subtly. A letter arrived at Alyssa's home, stamped with the airline's corporate logo. It was a cease and desist order, accusing her of defamation and warning her against speaking publicly about the case. Langston read it aloud, his voice calm but his grip on the paper tight. They're trying to silence you, he said, tossing the letter onto the table. Textbook corporate bullying. Alyssa picked it up, scanning the legal jargon that seemed designed to intimidate her. She felt the familiar sting of doubt creeping in but forced herself to push it aside. Let them try, she said, surprising herself with the steadiness in her voice. I'm not backing down. Langston smiled. That's the spirit. But we'll need more than just resolve to win this. They're playing dirty, and we need to be ready. Langston wasted no time. Over the next few days, he connected with other former employees of the airline, compiling a damning narrative of systemic discrimination. Tara Hayes proved to be a valuable ally, providing not just documents but also insight into the company's internal culture. They have a quota, Tara revealed during a late-night call with Alyssa and Langston. They won't put it in writing, but every month, they target a certain number of passengers to review under the guise of policy enforcement. It's not about safety, it's about profiling. Alyssa felt a chill run down her spine. How did they get away with it for so long? Fear, Tara said simply. Most people just want to move on with their lives. They don't have the time or resources to fight back. Langston nodded, which is exactly why they didn't expect someone like Alyssa. The first hearing was scheduled weeks later, But Langston filed a motion to expedite, citing the urgency of the case and the ongoing harm to other passengers. The airline's legal team responded with a flood of counterclaims, accusing Alyssa of being disruptive and exaggerating the incident. Alyssa sat in Langston's small office as he reviewed the latest filings. "They're trying to bury us in paperwork," he said, rubbing his temples. "It's a common tactic. They think they can outlast us." "Can they?" Alyssa asked, her voice tinged with worry. Langston looked up, his eyes sharp. "Not if we stay the course. They underestimated you, Alyssa. That was their first mistake. And their second? Underestimating me." One morning, as Alyssa sifted through the growing pile of documents and correspondence, her phone buzzed. It was a number she didn't recognize. She answered cautiously. "Miss Harper?" A warm, confident voice said on the other end. "My name is Evelyn Porter. I'm a civil rights attorney, and I've been following your case. I'd like to help." Alyssa's breath caught. Evelyn Porter was a name she knew well, a prominent figure in civil rights law known for taking on major corporations and winning. "You've heard about my case?" she asked, still processing the moment. "More than that," Evelyn replied. "I've seen cases like yours before, and I know how these companies operate. They think they can outspend and intimidate you into submission. But if you're willing to fight, I'd like to join your team." Alyssa felt a surge of hope. I don't know how to thank you." "Don't thank me yet," Evelyn said with a chuckle. "We've got a long road ahead. But together, we can make sure this airline answers for what they've done." With Evelyn on board, the case took on new momentum. She brought not only her expertise, but also a network of resources that Langston and Alyssa had lacked. Evelyn's team began uncovering more evidence. Testimonies from current employees who spoke anonymously about the pressure to enforce discriminatory practices, financial records showing disproportionate fines levied against certain passengers, and even internal communications where senior executives discussed minimizing undesirable clientele. The evidence was damning, but the airline didn't back down. Instead, they launched a smear campaign against Alyssa, leaking fabricated stories to discredit her. Social media buzzed with accusations, some claiming she was fabricating her story for money, others attacking her personally. Alyssa tried to ignore the noise, but it wasn't easy. One evening, as she scrolled through the hateful comments, tears pricked her eyes. Langston found her staring at her phone, her expression a mix of anger and sadness. "They want you to feel this way," he said, sitting beside her. "Don't give them the satisfaction." Alyssa put the phone down, taking a deep breath. "I know. It's just hard." Langston nodded. "I won't lie. It's going to get harder. But you're not alone in this. And every time they attack you, it's a sign that we're hitting them where it hurts." 2 weeks before the hearing, Evelyn called an emergency meeting. Langston and Alyssa arrived at her downtown office, where a stack of papers awaited them on the conference table. "This," Evelyn said, pointing to a highlighted section of a document, "is the smoking gun." The document was an internal email chain between senior executives at the airline. In it, they explicitly discussed targeting passengers based on race and body type under the guise of maintaining brand standards. "They've been lying about their policies all along," Evelyn explained. "This email proves that their actions weren't isolated incidents. They were deliberate and systemic." Alyssa stared at the document, a mix of rage and triumph bubbling within her. "So this is it. This is how we win. It's a big piece of the puzzle," Evelyn said. "But we still have to present it effectively. They'll fight tooth and nail to discredit it." Langston grinned. "Let them try." As the hearing date approached, the tension grew palpable. Alyssa spent hours preparing with Evelyn and Langston, practicing her testimony and reviewing the evidence. She knew the airline would do everything in its power to tear her down, but she refused to let them win. One night, as she lay in bed, her hands resting on her belly, she whispered to her unborn child. "This is for you," she said softly. "For all the time someone told us we didn't belong. We're going to prove them wrong." The next morning, Alyssa walked into Evelyn's office with a newfound determination. "Let's do this," she said, her voice steady. Langston and Evelyn exchanged a glance, both smiling. The fight was far from over, but Alyssa Harper was ready for whatever came next. The courthouse was an imposing structure, its marble facade gleaming under the mid-morning sun. Alyssa stood at the bottom of the steps, her hand resting on her swollen belly as she took a steadying breath. The moment felt surreal, like the final act of a story she hadn't chosen to be part of. Behind her, Langston and Evelyn flanked her like sentinels, their confidence radiating outward. "Are you ready for this?" Evelyn asked, her voice firm but kind. Alyssa nodded, clutching the handle of her leather bag. "I'm ready." The courtroom was packed, a mix of reporters, legal professionals, and onlookers who had heard whispers of the case. Alyssa sat beside Evelyn and Langston at the plaintiff's table, the weight of the room pressing down on her. Across the aisle, the airline's legal team, 6 attorneys dressed in sleek, tailored suits, exuded corporate arrogance. The judge, a sharp-eyed woman in her 60s, entered the courtroom, and the chatter ceased. The bailiff called the room to order, and the proceedings began. Evelyn rose to deliver the opening statement. Her presence was commanding, her voice clear and unwavering. "Your Honor, today we will prove that Harper Airways engaged in a pattern of systemic discrimination, targeting passengers based on race, appearance, and other superficial factors under the guise of policy enforcement. My client, Alyssa Harper, was not just denied her rightful place on a flight. She was humiliated, diminished, and subjected to treatment no one should endure. This case is not just about one incident. It is about holding a corporation accountable for its actions." A ripple of murmurs moved through the courtroom as Evelyn returned to her seat. Alyssa glanced at her, feeling a spark of hope. The airline's lead attorney, a man named Richard Collins, rose next. His demeanor was polished, his tone dismissive. "Your Honor, this case is a gross exaggeration. The airline acted within its rights and its policies, as it does for all passengers, without prejudice. We will demonstrate that the claims against my client are baseless and that Miss Harper is pursuing this case for personal gain." Collins sat, his smug expression daring anyone to challenge him. Alyssa clenched her fists under the table, her anger simmering. The first witness was Tara Hayes. Evelyn called her to the stand, and the courtroom fell silent as Tara recounted her time working for the airline. They had unwritten quotas, Tara explained, her voice steady. Each month, we were expected to flag a certain number of passengers as non-compliant. Most of the time, those passengers were people of color, overweight individuals, or anyone who didn't fit their ideal customer image. Collins rose for the cross-examination. "Miss Hayes, you left the airline under less than amicable circumstances, didn't you?" Tara held her ground. "I left because I couldn't stand working for a company that treated people that way. And you were compensated during your departure, correct?" Collins pressed. "Doesn't that make your testimony biased?" Tara's jaw tightened, but she didn't waver. "The truth isn't biased." Next, Alyssa took the stand. Evelyn guided her through her testimony, allowing her to recount every detail of the incident. The humiliation, the stares, the dismissive attitude of the staff. "I was made to feel like I didn't belong," Alyssa said, her voice breaking slightly, as if my existence was an inconvenience. When Collins rose for the cross-examination, his questions were sharp, designed to trip her up. "Miss Harper, you claim you were denied boarding due to discrimination, but isn't it true that you raised your voice and disrupted operations that day?" "I raised my voice because I was being treated unfairly," Alyssa replied firmly. "Wouldn't you?" Collins smirked. "So you admit to being disruptive?" "I admit to standing up for myself," Alyssa shot back, something your airline didn't expect. The courtroom murmured, and even the judge looked intrigued by her defiance. The turning point came when Evelyn introduced the internal emails obtained from Tara. One by one, they were displayed on a large screen for the courtroom to see. "This email," Evelyn said, pointing to the highlighted section, "is from a senior executive instructing staff to target passengers based on aesthetic concerns. And this one," she continued, flipping to another, "explicitly discusses ways to enforce these standards without drawing attention from regulators." Collins objected, arguing the emails were taken out of context, but the judge overruled him. The damage was done. Langston leaned over to Alyssa, a triumphant smile on his face. "They're squirming." As the trial progressed, more evidence surfaced. Testimonies from current employees who had anonymously reported discriminatory practices, financial records showing the airline's fines disproportionately targeted certain passengers, and even customer complaints that mirrored Alyssa's experience. The airline's defense crumbled under the weight of the evidence. Collins tried to shift blame, claiming rogue employees were responsible, but Evelyn was relentless. "Rogue employees?" she echoed during her closing argument. "How many rogue employees does it take to establish a pattern of discrimination? 10? 20? Or does it start at the top, with policies designed to exclude and demean?" The courtroom was silent as Evelyn returned to her seat. Alyssa felt a swell of gratitude for her legal team and for herself, for not giving up. The jury deliberated for hours, but to Alyssa, it felt like an eternity. When they finally returned, the courtroom held its breath as the foreperson read the verdict. In the case of Harper versus Harper Airways, we find in favor of the plaintiff, Alyssa Harper. A collective gasp filled the room, followed by scattered applause. The airline was ordered to pay substantial damages, implement new anti-discrimination policies, and undergo a federal audit. Alyssa sat frozen, tears streaming down her face. Langston placed a hand on her shoulder, his expression one of quiet pride. "You did it," he said. "No," Alyssa replied, her voice thick with emotion. "We did it.